me to meet the person I was before they decided I was their problem. The Golden Retriever employee era. Picture this. I walked into that office every single morning like I was reporting for duty at the Justice League headquarters. My coffee mug might as well have been a cape because I treated every mundane corporate task like it was my personal mission to save the world. All my coworkers treated their jobs like jobs. I treated mine like I was starring in some inspirational workplace movie where the underdog changes everything through sheer determination and an alarming amount of overtime. I was that employee who actually read the company handbook, not just skimmed it during orientation, but genuinely studied it like it was sacred text. I was the only one who noticed every tiny handbook update. When they sent out company-wide emails about new initiatives, I was the only one who responded with detailed questions and suggestions for improvement. My inbox was a graveyard of corporate communications that I had not only read, but analyzed for ways to optimize our workflow. The irony is that my coworkers actually liked me. I wasn't some brown-nosing corporate climber trying to step on people to get ahead. I genuinely wanted everyone to succeed. If someone was struggling with their workload, I would stay late to help them catch up. If a new employee looked lost during their first week, I became their unofficial mentor and tour guide. I was basically the human equivalent of a golden retriever in business casual clothing. My desk was organized like a military operation. Color-coded files, labeled folders, a system for everything. I had backup plans for my backup plans. When other people's computers crashed and they lost important documents, I was the person who somehow had copies saved in 3 different locations. I treated our company database like it was my personal library, constantly updating information and fixing errors that had been sitting there for months. Every department meeting was like Christmas morning to me. I showed up with printed agendas, prepared questions, and sometimes even PowerPoint presentations that nobody had asked for. When management announced new company goals, I created personal action plans to help achieve them. I was essentially doing consulting work for free while getting paid entry-level wages, and I thought this was perfectly reasonable behavior. The thing about being aggressively competent in a mediocre environment is that it makes everyone else look bad by comparison. While my coworkers were content to do the bare minimum required to collect their paychecks, I was out there treating every task like it was a personal challenge to exceed expectations. I didn't realize that in many workplaces, exceeding expectations isn't seen as admirable dedication, but as an annoying disruption to the established order of comfortable mediocrity. I was completely blind to office politics. When people had hushed conversations that stopped when I approached, I assumed they were planning surprise birthday parties or discussing weekend plans. When certain managers would exchange meaningful looks during meetings, I thought they were just having one of those moments where colleagues are on the same wavelength. I interpreted passive-aggressive comments as constructive feedback and responded with genuine gratitude for their input. I was so out of touch with office gossip that when the GM's mugshot surfaced online, I still assumed he was a rockstar manager who just had a rough night. My performance reviews were consistently excellent, which only reinforced my belief that hard work and dedication were universally appreciated values. I received praise for my initiative, my reliability, my positive attitude, and my willingness to take on additional responsibilities. What I didn't understand was that this praise was coming from upper management who lived in a different universe from the middle managers who actually had to deal with my daily existence. I volunteered for projects that nobody else wanted. I stayed late to finish work that could have waited until tomorrow. I came in early to prepare for meetings that could have been emails. I treated every company event like it was a networking opportunity to build stronger relationships with my colleagues. I genuinely believed that if I just worked hard enough and cared enough, everyone would recognize my value and we would all succeed together in perfect workplace harmony. The most ridiculous part is that I actually thought my managers appreciated having someone so dedicated on their team. When they started assigning me increasingly difficult projects with impossible deadlines, I saw it as recognition of my capabilities rather than an attempt to set me up for failure. When they began excluding me from certain meetings or decision-making processes, I assumed they were trying to reduce my workload so I wouldn't get overwhelmed. Looking back, I realized I was like that overly enthusiastic student who reminds the teacher about homework assignments right before the bell rings. Technically doing the right thing, but making everyone else's life more difficult in the process. My genuine desire to excel had painted a target on my back the size of a billboard, and I was too busy perfecting my latest process improvement proposal to notice that the archers were taking aim. What I didn't realize was that my enthusiasm had caught the attention of some very specific people who were not impressed by my dedication. In fact, they were actively annoyed by it. And these people were about to become the architects of their own spectacular downfall. Meet the Bumbling Villain Squad? Let me introduce you to the masterminds behind this corporate catastrophe. First was the general manager, Harvey, whose hiring process apparently involved zero background checks, since his mugshot from a domestic abuse case was circulating online before he even finished his first week. Harvey had that special talent for making terrible decisions with absolute confidence, like he was following some kind of reverse leadership manual. Then there was the assistant manager, Captain Incompetence, who had somehow failed upward through the corporate ranks with impressive determination. He'd read buzzwords off a cheat sheet, then butcher every policy he tried to enforce, turning simple procedures into confusing disasters that left everyone more confused than when they started. The department supervisor, the ego, had been promoted to her level of incompetence about 5 years earlier and treated her minimal authority like she was running a small country. Her signature move was turning 5-minute conversations into hour-long meetings that accomplished absolutely nothing, while creating unnecessary paperwork she'd later complain about. Finally, there was the operations manager, Professor Chaos, who earned his nickname through his uncanny ability to create problems where none previously existed. He would schedule mandatory team-building exercises during the busiest part of the workday, then act genuinely confused when productivity dropped. These four formed what I can only describe as a perfect storm of managerial mediocrity. They held secret meetings in conference rooms with glass walls, apparently unaware that everyone could see them huddled together like they were planning the crime of the century. Their conspiratorial whispers were about as subtle as a marching band practicing in a library. They would stop talking whenever I walked by, which would have been suspicious if I wasn't so busy assuming the best about everyone's intentions. What made this situation particularly absurd was how threatened they felt by someone who was just trying to do their job well. My competence wasn't some calculated strategy to make them look bad. I wasn't gunning for their positions or trying to undermine their authority. I was literally just showing up and doing the work that needed to be done. But in their minds, my basic professionalism was apparently an existential threat to their carefully constructed empire of mediocrity. The ego was particularly bothered by the fact that other employees actually liked working with me. She had spent years cultivating relationships based on fear and micromanagement, so the concept of earning respect through competence was completely foreign to her. Captain Incompetence was threatened because I made his complete lack of useful skills painfully obvious by comparison. Professor Chaos was upset because my systematic approach to problem solving highlighted just how chaotic and ineffective his management style really was. Harvey just seemed annoyed that someone was making the rest of his team look competent by comparison. Their strategic planning sessions were legendary exercises in missing the point entirely. They would spend hours analyzing my work performance, looking for weaknesses that didn't exist, while completely ignoring actual problems that were affecting the entire department. They created elaborate theories about my motivations that were so far from reality they might as well have been fan fiction. According to their version of events, I was some kind of corporate spy sent to infiltrate their operation and report back to upper management about their various shortcomings. What made their eventual scheme so predictably disastrous was their complete inability to think more than one step ahead. They were so focused on getting rid of me that they never considered what might happen after they succeeded. They were like cartoon villains who spend so much time perfecting their elaborate death traps that they forget to have an escape plan. Their master strategy had all the sophistication of a middle school cafeteria plot and about the same chance of success. The most ridiculous part was how seriously they took themselves throughout this entire process. They acted like they were conducting some kind of covert intelligence operation instead of plotting against a coworker who brought homemade cookies to staff meetings. They treated their petty office politics like it was a matter of national security. Watching them try to be sneaky was like watching elephants attempt ballet. Their plan was brewing with all the subtlety of a volcanic eruption and about as much chance of ending well for anyone involved. They had convinced themselves that they were criminal masterminds executing the perfect frame job, when in reality they were more like the Three Stooges attempting corporate espionage. The beautiful irony was that in their determination to prove I was bad for the company, they were about to demonstrate just how catastrophically bad they were for everyone involved. What I didn't realize was that their brilliant scheme was already in motion, and I was about to become the unwitting star of the most obvious setup in corporate history, the art of corporate subtlety. Their sabotage campaign launched with all the subtlety of setting off fireworks in an empty theater. The ego kicked things off with what she probably considered a masterstroke of psychological warfare, cutting my hours. Instead of my usual 40 hours per week, I was suddenly getting 25 or 30. When I asked about it, she delivered this elaborate explanation about efficiency and labor costs, claiming this was actually beneficial for my work-life balance. I thanked her for looking out for my well-being, though it was interesting how this concern for my personal time never extended to offering me a pay raise to compensate for the lost income. When I asked if there was anything I could do to help optimize the schedule, she stared at me like I had just volunteered to solve world hunger with a calculator. Captain Incompetence took the exclusion approach, systematically cutting me out of important communications and then acting shocked when I didn't have information I couldn't possibly have known. He would send emails about schedule changes to everyone except me, then expressed genuine disappointment when I showed up at the wrong time. When I politely pointed out that I hadn't received the email, he would make this theatrical show of checking his sent folder and claim it must have been a technical error. This happened so frequently that my coworkers started forwarding me emails I should have received directly, which completely defeated his purpose. The three of them began holding what they apparently thought were covert strategy sessions right outside my work area. They would huddle together and whisper while glancing in my direction, seemingly convinced they were being inconspicuous. It was like watching middle schoolers plan a surprise party for someone they actually hated. Other employees started asking me what was going on with these little conferences. I genuinely had no idea, so I made up excuses about operational improvements and positive departmental changes. Their coordination efforts involved giving me contradictory instructions and then acting frustrated when I asked for clarification. The ego would tell me to handle something one way. Captain Incompetence would demand the exact opposite, and Professor Chaos would explain that both approaches were wrong. When I tried getting all three in the same room to discuss the conflicting directions, they acted like I was being difficult and making simple things complicated. I started documenting these conversations because I was genuinely confused about what they wanted. They escalated to nitpicking my work with obsessive dedication. The ego would review completed projects and manufacture problems that didn't exist, complaining my reports were too detailed or too thorough. Captain Incompetence would critique my communication style, suggesting I was being too direct or too polite depending on his mood. Professor Chaos questioned my decision-making, even when my decisions led to successful outcomes. I kept thanking them for their feedback and asking for specific suggestions to better meet their expectations. The situation reached peak absurdity when they started assigning me tasks clearly outside my job description, then criticizing me for lacking proper training or resources. They asked me to handle vendor negotiations requiring authorization I didn't have, then expressed disappointment when I couldn't close deals beyond my authority level. They assigned technical projects requiring specialized software we didn't own, then acted surprised when I couldn't produce professional results with basic office tools. I kept volunteering for additional training and requesting access to necessary resources, which seemed to annoy them even more. Other employees were starting to notice something weird was happening. Coworkers approached me privately asking if I had upset management somehow. They could see I was being treated differently, but couldn't figure out why. When I explained I was just as confused, they started sharing their own observations about the manager's behavior. Several people mentioned the three of them spending unusual amounts of time discussing my performance. I told them management was probably just trying to help me develop professionally. The most ridiculous incident happened when they tried writing me up for working overtime. I had stayed late to finish a project Captain Incompetence had assigned with a next-day deadline, and apparently this was my fault for poor time management. When I pointed out the timeline had been set by management and I was meeting their expectations, they explained I should have prioritized better or asked for help. When I asked who I should have approached since they were all unavailable in meetings, they said I should have figured out a way to get their attention. I apologized for the misunderstanding and asked them to help me develop better time management strategies. Their pre-termination strategy involved questioning every decision I made and every process I followed, even established procedures that had been working effectively for months. They would demand I explain my reasoning for routine tasks like I was defending a doctoral thesis. When I provided detailed explanations, they suggested I was overthinking simple problems. When I simplified responses, they implied I wasn't being thorough enough. Looking back, I was like a cartoon character walking toward a clearly marked cliff while cheerfully waving at the people holding the dynamite. Everyone could see what was coming except me. I was too busy trying to be the perfect employee to notice I was about to step into the most obvious trap in workplace history. But their amateur hour conspiracy was about to graduate to something much more dramatic. The frame job of the century. The moment finally arrived when our three criminal masterminds decided to execute their brilliant plan. Picture this scene like something out of a heist movie, except instead of Danny Ocean and his crew, we had the corporate equivalent of the Three Stooges trying to pull off the crime of the century. They had been planning this setup for weeks, whispering in conference rooms and exchanging meaningful glances across the office like they were coordinating a bank robbery instead of trying to frame someone for allegedly taking home leftover food. The setup was so elaborate you would have thought they were trying to steal the crown jewels. Captain Incompetence had apparently spent days orchestrating this masterpiece of deception. The plan involved a canceled catering order that had been sitting in our kitchen for hours. Here's the beautiful part about their master plan. This canceled order was never on any official ticket, never documented anywhere, just sitting there like forgotten evidence they could manipulate however they wanted. One of the line cooks, who was apparently either in on the scheme or just tired of looking at the food, offered it to me as I was finishing my shift. In my typical fashion, I said thanks and took it home, thinking this was just normal workplace courtesy. What I didn't know was that this innocent interaction had been carefully observed and documented by our amateur detective squad. The next morning, they called me into the conference room with all the drama of a courtroom proceeding. The three of them were sitting there like they had just solved the mystery of who killed JFK. The ego had this folder in front of her that she kept tapping with her pen, as if it contained classified government secrets instead of whatever flimsy evidence they had managed to scrape together. Professor Chaos was leaning back in his chair with this smug expression that suggested he thought he was about to deliver the performance of a lifetime. Captain Incompetence looked like he was trying not to smile, which made him look more like someone with gas problems than someone who had just cracked a major case. They started the meeting by asking me about my previous day's activities, which seemed like an odd conversation starter, but I went along with it. I explained my tasks, my interactions with coworkers, and my general workflow, still assuming this was some kind of performance review or project debriefing. They listened with the intensity of federal investigators, taking notes and nodding seriously at information that was about as exciting as a grocery list. Then came the dramatic revelation. The ego cleared her throat, like she was about to deliver a presidential address, and announced they had reason to believe I had stolen company property. Captain Incompetence launched into what sounded like a prepared speech. We take theft very seriously here, and your actions yesterday was completely unacceptable and shows a lack of integrity that we cannot tolerate in this organization. The grammar was as mangled as their logic, but they delivered it with the conviction of prosecutors presenting a murder case. I actually laughed because I thought they were joking. The dead serious expressions on their faces quickly made me realize this was not a joke. When they explained that they were talking about the food from the canceled catering order, I tried to explain the situation, offering to speak with the line cook who had given me the food so we could clear up what was obviously a misunderstanding. But they weren't interested in hearing explanations or gathering additional information. They had already made up their minds about what had happened and were not open to alternative interpretations of the facts. The evidence they presented was so thin you could see through it with a magnifying glass. They had no witnesses to any actual theft. They had no video footage of me taking anything without permission. They had no documentation proving that the food was not supposed to be given away. Their entire case was based on the assumption that I had stolen something, combined with their apparent belief that their assumption was equivalent to established fact. It was like watching prosecutors try to build a murder case around the fact that someone had been seen holding a kitchen knife. I kept trying to reason with them, explaining that this was clearly a misunderstanding that could be resolved with a simple conversation. I offered to pay for the food if there had been some kind of policy violation. I suggested we could review the company handbook together to clarify what the actual rules were about leftover catering orders. Every suggestion I made was met with a kind of dismissive responses you might expect from people who had already written the ending to this story. As the meeting continued, I started to realize that this wasn't really about stolen food at all. The accusations were so ridiculous and their refusal to consider any reasonable explanations was so obvious that I began to understand what was actually happening. This was an excuse, not an investigation. They had already decided to fire me and were just going through the motions of justifying their decision. The canceled catering order was just convenient timing that allowed them to create a narrative that sounded official. What they didn't know was that my phone had been recording in my pocket the entire time, not because I had planned anything, but because I had accidentally started a voice memo earlier and forgotten to stop it. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about these things. I tried one last time to maintain my professional composure and suggest that we handle this situation in a way that would be fair to everyone involved. But they had already moved past the accusation phase and were heading straight toward the sentencing portion of their Kangaroo Court. The realization that I had been completely outmaneuvered was starting to sink in, even though I was still trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. The firing motivations around the office. They were ready to deliver. Ego cleared her throat one final time and delivered the verdict with all the ceremony of a judge sentencing someone to life in prison. She announced that due to my violation of company policy regarding theft of company property, my employment was being terminated effective immediately. The way she said it, you would have thought she was announcing the successful conclusion of a major FBI investigation rather than firing someone over leftover sandwiches. Captain Incompetence nodded solemnly like he was witnessing some kind of historic moment in corporate justice. Professor Chaos actually had this little smile playing at the corners of his mouth like he was trying not to break character during his Oscar-winning performance as a concerned manager. They told me to finish cleaning out my workspace and collect my personal belongings while they watched like I was about to download state secrets. I was apparently such a dangerous criminal that I couldn't be trusted to pack my own coffee mug without adult supervision. They stood there monitoring my every move as I gathered my few personal items, probably expecting me to break down in tears or start begging for another chance. Instead, I just methodically collected my things while trying to process what had just happened. The shock was starting to wear off, and the reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. I had been completely outplayed by people I had genuinely respected and trusted. These were the same managers who had praised my work ethic and performance reviews and relied on my competence to solve problems they couldn't handle themselves. Now, they were treating me like I was some kind of corporate criminal who had betrayed their trust and violated their sacred policies. The disconnect between their previous appreciation and their current hostility was so jarring that I kept waiting for someone to tell me this was all an elaborate joke. I had two choices in that moment. I could fight back immediately, demand to speak with HR, insist on reviewing the company handbook, or request a meeting with upper management to contest their decision. Or I could take the high road, maintain my dignity, and handle this situation with the same professionalism I had always demonstrated. Something told me that arguing with them right then would be pointless, since they had clearly already made up their minds about the outcome they wanted. Fighting would just give them more ammunition to use against me and probably wouldn't change their decision anyway. They were obviously expecting me to slink away, defeated like some kind of wounded animal retreating to lick its wounds in private. The way they were looking at me suggested they thought this would be the end of the story. I would quietly disappear from their workplace, maybe complain to a few friends about unfair treatment, and eventually move on to another job where I would hopefully learn my lesson about not being so dedicated to my work. They seemed to believe that firing me would solve all their problems and eliminate the threat I apparently posed to their comfortable mediocrity. The awkward aftermath was almost worse than the actual termination meeting. I had to walk through the office carrying my box of personal belongings, while my coworkers watched with confused expressions. Some of them approached me quietly to ask what was happening, but I just told them I was no longer going to be working there and wished them well in their future endeavors. I didn't want to create drama or put anyone in an uncomfortable position by sharing details about what had just occurred. My goal was to exit as gracefully as possible while preserving my professional reputation. My coworkers were genuinely shocked by the news. Several of them followed me out to the parking lot to express their disbelief and anger about the situation. They told me they couldn't understand why anyone would want to fire the most reliable and hardworking person in the department. Some of them mentioned that they had noticed the managers acting strangely around me recently, but hadn't understood what was happening until now. A few people offered to serve as references for future job applications and promised to put in good words for me with their contacts at other companies. Meanwhile, back inside the office, our 3 amateur detectives were probably celebrating their victory like they had just solved the crime of the century. They had successfully eliminated their biggest threat and proved their superior management skills by removing someone who made them look incompetent by comparison. Captain Incompetence was probably feeling vindicated after months of being shown up by someone who actually knew how to do their job effectively. The ego was likely basking in the glow of having exercised her authority in such a decisive manner. Professor Chaos was probably congratulating himself on executing such a brilliant strategy. They seemed to believe that firing me would be the end of their problems rather than the beginning of much bigger ones. In their minds, they had won the war by eliminating their enemy through superior tactical planning. They had outmaneuvered someone who was too naive to see their scheme coming and too trusting to fight back effectively. Their assumption was that I would simply disappear quietly and they could return to their comfortable routine of minimal effort and maximum drama without anyone around to highlight their various shortcomings. But something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me as I drove home with my box of belongings in the passenger seat. The more I thought about their behavior over the past few months, the more obvious it became that this had been planned well in advance. Their sudden interest in nitpicking my work, their mysterious meetings, their increasingly obvious attempts to create problems where none existed, it all made sense now as part of a larger strategy to build a case against me. What they didn't know was that I had accidentally recorded their entire termination meeting. That voice memo I had forgotten to stop was still running in my pocket, capturing every word of their grammatically challenged accusations and their refusal to listen to reasonable explanations. As I sat in my driveway, staring at that recording on my phone, I realized I had something they probably didn't expect me to have. Evidence. Real, actual proof of what had really happened in that conference room. I had no idea what to do with it yet, but something told me this recording was going to be important. They thought they had written the final chapter of this story, but they had no idea I was holding the pen.